On the 15th of July, 2004, the 34-year-old Yoo Young-chul was arrested from a massage parlor, which he often visited to look for his victims. Convicted of more than 20 gruesome murders, rapes, and numerous other charges, Yoo, or more commonly known as the Raincoat Killer, instilled fear in the innocent streets of the capital of Korea, Seoul. Targeting women, wealthy elderly people, and prostitutes, specifically Yoo wasn't just an ordinary serial killer. According to his own words, he was a practicing cannibal who would devour on different organs from his victim's body. But the question here is that how did this young man wander down this path? What was his motive? Why did he target a specific group of people? And finally, how and when did he get caught? So join me, and as we try to look for answers for some of these questions by taking a look into the dark mind of the Raincoat Killer. Early life. Born on the 18th of April, 1970 in Gochang County of South Korea, Yoo's life was just like any others living in utmost poverty. He was often bullied in school, which had adverse effects on his mental health and definitely became the reason for his resentment towards the rich. His parents separated soon after his birth, and he was raised by his grandparents for a while, but soon after that, he moved back with his father, who was living in Seoul. It wasn't long till his lawless side started to come out, even though it was to provide for his family. His history with crime started early in his high school years. His extensive official criminal record began as early as 1988 at the young age of 18. He was arrested multiple times on the counts of theft. Other than that, he was also caught selling child pornography. In 1991, he was sentenced for 10 months in prison because of some theft charges. 2 years later, on the 23rd of June, 1993, he married his girlfriend, and almost a year later, his first and only son was born. In 1998, he was arrested for identity theft and forgery. He was caught posing as a police officer and abusing authority by extorting money from people, and as a result, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Around the year 2000, his crimes got more serious, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for sexually abusing a 15-year-old girl. This led to his wife divorcing him, and he got out of prison on the 11th of September 2003 as a single man and with extreme resentment towards women. According to some accounts, Young said that he hated his ex-wife so much that he would have killed her if it wasn't for his 11-year-old son. This was the time when his killing spree began. The motives of Yoo Young-chul. Now, one of the most important questions while talking about any serial killer is the motive behind his doings. Every killer has someone they look up to or idolize. For Yoo, it was Korean serial killer Jong Do-yong who targeted rich people of Korea. Jong had murdered 9 wealthy people in Busan during the period of 1999 to 2000. Yoo's motivation behind becoming a killer and choosing his victims was twofold. He had extreme hatred towards 2 people, the rich and women. He saw himself as a savior and thought he was trying to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor of Korea. Growing as an extremely poor young boy, his hatred for the rich wasn't something new, but his loathsomeness for women began when his wife divorced him while he was serving time in the prison. He put it in his own words as, "Women should not be sluts, and the rich should know what they have done." Reign of Terror. After his release from Seoul Detention Center in 2003, he began to plot his first murder and started exploring different methods on how to strike his victims. He chose beating them to death by a customized hammer, which he could easily grip in his hands. In the beginning, he tried his method out on animals first. He would gather some stray dogs and then kill those innocent dogs by striking them with a hammer. After perfecting his method, he struck for the first time only 13 days after his release. His victims were Lee Deok-soo, a Sukmyung University professor, and his 68-year-old wife, Lee Yoon-ok. They lived in the posh Seoul neighborhood. He attacked them with his hammer and staged it as a robbery-motivated murder by trashing the couple's closet, even though he didn't take anything, which was weird for a robbery crime scene. His shoe prints were found at the crime scene, which were later linked to other murders. He usually attacked during the morning as he knew the elderly would be at home, just like he did in the Gugidong murders. He broke into their house at 10:40 a.m. first, killing the grandmother, who was an 83-year-old woman. Then the homeowner's wife came down, and he bludgeoned her to death after asking who else was in the house, to which she replied her son and her husband. He found the son and hammered him to death. He couldn't find the husband, so then he proceeded to trash the house to stage it as a robbery. Obviously, by seeing the nature of crime, this soon turned into a national news, and the people of Korea were taken aback by these ghastly murders and the cruelty of the killer. After this, he broke into the house of a local millionaire and beat his wife by taking her to the bathroom. He fled the scene, and the wife survived, but was pronounced dead after succumbing to her wounds in the hospital. His next target was the home of Kim Jong-seok. He killed the housekeeper and the homeowner. The housekeeper had a baby which she was trying to protect, so he took the housekeeper away and killed her. While he was trying to make it look like a robbery, he cut his hand and started to bleed. To get rid of his DNA from the scene of crime, he set the house on fire while the baby was still in the house. Thankfully, the baby survived and was rescued by the owner's daughter-in-law. Break from killings. In late 2003, he started dating an escort, and as a result, for some time, he stopped his killings. However, once his girlfriend came to know about his past life, his criminal record, and his previous marriage, she told him to never see her again, and they broke up. Yoo, at this point, felt heartbroken and betrayed, and this increased his anger towards women even more, and he started targeting prostitutes in his next spree. Change in pattern. Even though most of his targets were women and elderly rich people, one of his victims was a street vendor who sold him a fake Viagra. After the vendor packed up his stuff, Yoo posed as a police officer and tried to arrest him. He handcuffed him and put him in the back seat of his van. The vendor at this point knew that Yoo wasn't a police officer, as he had noticed that he wasn't with a partner. After this, Yoo started beating him. He thought he was dead, but the vendor was still alive and kicked him, after which Yoo stabbed him in his leg and then beat him to death with his hammer. This pattern was unusual for the Raincoat killer. And after this murder, he entered the second part of his killing spree. Fatal obsession, series of prostitute killings. From the beginning of 2004, he started targeting prostitutes. They were an easy target as no one would report them missing since they keep their real identities hidden. He would ask for women with specific physical traits, such as short height, not too fat, so he could easily cut them up in pieces. He would call the escort services and would tell them his preferences. After an escort would arrive, he would take her to the bathroom and first show affection. Then he would handcuff her and bludgeon her to death. I know this sounds disturbing, but it doesn't just stop here. The details after the murder get even more horrific, as he would decapitate the victims with his jackknife and then cut off her fingerprints and flush them. Yoo would often cut the victim's body in 18 pieces, so it would be easier to dispose of the body. He selected his victims by calling multiple escort services every 2-3 days, which led to the death of 9 escort girls. At one point, he ordered an X-ray of his whole body so he could understand the anatomy of body better and could figure out a better way to attack his victims and dismember their bodies. He took advantage of the anonymity of this sex market. After cutting the head of his victims, he would hang it to dry. Sometimes the decapitated bodies would run towards him, but that did not scare him. The only thing that scared him was his son calling him while he was decapitating a person and asking him if he was feeling better and if his fever was gone. During this time, he started developing cannibal tendencies and would eat his victims' liver and other organs. It was his messed up way of cleansing his soul and clearing his mind. Pursuit of the Raincoat Killer. After a long time of his ongoing killings, he was finally caught, not by the police, but by the owner of the escort services he would often call. He made careless mistakes due to which he ended up getting caught. The first one was calling an escort service with his victim's phone, which was very out of the blue for him as well. The second one was that he would often change his aliases to call those massage parlors, but they were mostly owned by the same man named Mr. No. He noticed the pattern that whenever the number 6523 would call, the girls would not turn back up. They would be missing or not come to work the next day. He contacted other massage parlor owners, and they confirmed his suspicions of that number. They said when that number would call, the escorts would go missing. After getting his suspicions confirmed by other massage parlor owners, Mr. No contacted Mr. Young from the Mobile Investigation Unit. A few days later, Yoo called again and wanted to hire an escort after noticing the number Mr. No informed Mr. Young, and they set up men in different allies and parks. Yoo did not like the woman they sent and complained she was too tall. Obviously, he had a stereotype, which was women who were easy to dismember. So he sent her back, and finally, he approved the third woman they sent. He disclosed his location, and the authorities apprehended him. When they caught him, he was chewing business cards, and when they checked his phone, the last 4 digits were, you guessed it right, 6523. They handcuffed him and took him to the station. He was being tried for theft charges due to lack of evidence. His apartment was searched, and he surprisingly had a clean apartment, and his stuff was kept very neatly. He tried to fake an epileptic fit, and his handcuffs were removed, but seeing this opportunity, he escaped since he was kept alone in the room. However, thankfully, he was caught again after a few hours while walking on the sidewalk. This time, he confessed and admitted to the 26 murders, as self-confession was common in Korea those days. He confessed that he would talk to his victims for an hour before killing them, which was very off-putting. He agreed to lead the police to places where he dumped his victims' bodies. He also told police that to conceal his identity, he often wore a raincoat, and that is why he's known as the Raincoat Killer. Negligence of the Korean police. The Korean police officers would not exchange information between different stations. Only if they succeeded in apprehending someone would they inform other districts, because promotions were more important to them than catching serial killers. Had they informed each other of his mistakes, they would have ended up catching him way earlier than this, and there would have been way less murders. This lack of communication became the reason for his late arrest. The trial. His trial was not easy since corporal punishment was abolished in Korea. He appeared in court in September 2004, and he was charged on 21 counts of murder. He apologized to the victims' families, but he also confessed he had no intention of stopping the killings, and if he hadn't been caught, he would have continued killing more people. The victims' families were hurt by this statement, and they were compensated by the government since he failed to make a proper apology to them, since there is a law which says, if the criminal is unable to compensate the families for the crimes, the government would. He even said the women deserved to be caught by him. He refused to return to court and tried to kill himself before his hearing, but was stopped by the guard and hence saved. He had a bad attitude during his hearings and even tried to charge towards the judges. At one point, he tried to attack a spectator who was cursing him, but later, he promised to not cause any further disturbances. Prosecutors requested a death penalty for Yoo, and he himself thanked them for this request. As a result, Yoo Young-chul was sentenced to death on the 13th of December, 2004 for 20 counts of murder. While capital punishment is still permissible and is given out in sentencing, it has not been in operation since 1997. The Seoul Central District Court said, while talking about the sentence, said, "Murders of as many as 20 people are unprecedented in the nation and a very serious crime. The death penalty is inevitable for you in light of the enormous pains inflicted on the families concerned and the entire society." Currently, Yoo is serving time in the Seoul Detention Center, with more and more people rooting for a death sentence after learning about his crimes. Conclusion: Yoo's case is one of the most discussed cases of South Korea's history. His life has even been documented in a Netflix documentary, The Raincoat Killer, Chasing a Predator in Korea. Now, there's no denying that a serial killer's mind works very differently from a normal person's. They see themselves as a vigilante and seek vengeance for other people's wrongdoings or even for the government's mistakes. Yoo Young-chul's case was similar. He had a long-standing resentment for the wealthy since he was made fun of for his financial status, and the government was at fault due to the laws which favored the wealthy and barely supported the poverty-ridden population. No wonder most of his targets were the rich people of Seoul. His hatred of women stemmed from his ex-wife's divorce and his girlfriend leaving him, which was probably his own fault since he was very messed up. But he put the blame on those poor women instead of just working on himself.